Thanks for tuning in. We have here John-Henry Scherck. He is the owner of Growth Plays, a B2B SEO and content strategy service based in Los Angeles. He is amazing. He works with lots of high growth startups, delivers organic traffic, and then some. The Growth Play team works with founders, investors, marketing, and revenue operation leaders to plan and build and refine B2B SEO initiatives that map to the purchase journey using a very common sense approach. John-Henry, take it away.
Oh man, Bernard, thank you so much for the intro. I don't need to say anything. I can just dive into the presentation. Cool. So let me just get my little control set up right here. Everyone, hello. As Bernard said, I'm John-Henry Scherck. Really excited to be talking to you today. And I think before we can dive into really this process of mapping your purchase journey to content and keywords, I want to talk about sales models, because the sales model that you choose kind of dictates your content strategy in a way. So I think everyone on this call, you're probably familiar with top-down sales. You probably still get, outbound emails from sellers at top-down sales companies. And, that's really traditional of like making calls, sending emails, getting people into demos and getting them to sign. And that is a very valid form of like growth and a very valid go-to-market. But there's a movement inside of SaaS right now, B2B SaaS, kind of flipping on its head, and that's product-led growth. And I want to talk about that a little bit today, because whether you're doing top-down sales or product-led growth really does inform how you should go about creating digital experiences that try and basically generate pipeline. So product-led growth is like this, it's an end user focused growth model as opposed to like a sales focused growth model that relies on the product itself as the primary driver of customer acquisition. So getting folks into the product, conversion, getting them to pay for it, and expansion, getting them to invite other users. And this is pretty different from where software used to be. So like before SaaS, when it was like on-prem software, when you had to sell into the CIO because you had to actually get the software installed on servers, software was much more expensive, sales cycles were much longer, and there was like a much more of like a whining and dining and going out to golf kind of a vibe. And then we get into the cloud era when you were selling into executives, and that was still expensive and primarily like outbound fueled, and you were selling top down. So it's like you got into like a director of marketing or a VP of sales, and then they gave their software to everyone else on the team and kind of rolled it out in implementation. And now we're in this end user era, this like product-led growth era where folks can sign up for software on themselves, get some value out of it, decide if they want to move forward with it, and then naturally kind of opt into it. So it's just a kind of like a different way of building software. And I'm sure you're familiar with some tools that follow a product-led growth model. It's sometimes referred to as freemium. So like Asana, Notion, Airtable, all executing product-led growth exceptionally well. So there's three sort of pillars for PLG. First is designing for the end user. So instead of building a product that's easy to sell, you're building a product that's like great to use and easy to adopt and kind of sells itself. It's just a totally different way of really like building software. You're much more focused on users than buyers. You're continually improving the product so it grows in complexity with their needs. And then you're delivering value before you're capturing value. So you allow people to experience the product and get something out of it before they need to put in a credit card or go through a sales cycle. And then the third pillar is that like the product itself is part of the go-to-market motion. So instead of the go-to-market being all about like generating sales meetings that then go to contract negotiations and lead to close-won deals, the product itself is what needs to expand and get out there. And that itself generates sales. So like I used to work at DocSend. We'll use some examples from that later. Great example is like you send a DocSend link every time you use the product to somebody new, and they have the option to essentially create their own account at the end of the presentation. And so the product itself is part of the go-to-market strategy. The product itself solve for that Notion. The same example, you get invited to a Notion page, and then you can sign up for a free account. So the product itself is doing part of customer acquisition for you. It is part of your go-to-market motion. So the way that this works in action is, let's say you got a user, Jane downloads Slack. You're not going to use Slack alone or Asana alone or Notion alone, because those are all collaborative tools, kind of a theme with PLG. And so Jane invites her team over to Slack, and then Jane's team start using it, and they invite other folks in the company, people in other departments, because they want to collaborate, because Slack's a great tool. And pretty soon everyone says, we love Slack. It's heavily adopted. And then the team gets together, Jane and her team, they talk to their manager saying like, please buy Slack. And for an executive, that's a really easy decision to make because the tool's already been adopted. It's not like some top-down thing where they roll it out and hope it goes well, because it doesn't always do that. Like software doesn't always go well on big implementations. So if people are already using it and the product already has some momentum inside of the company, that's a great sign. That's an easy buy. So we just level set on sort of two different business models or two different go-to-market motions. Now I want to talk about two different frameworks for SEO. There's content-led SEO, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And there's product-led SEO, which we're just going to touch on. I have a lot of respect for the folks that do it. It's just not really where we focus. It's much more scalable and much bigger picture and a function of the product. But content-led SEO is a function of content marketing. Every piece of content that's created is very intentionally done, well-researched, typically written by someone with some expertise in the more like upmarket B2B space. And the content itself maps to the buyer journey and targets SEO keywords that correspond to that journey. And there's things that, it's not always direct response. It's not always about like ranking for product terms. It can be top of funnel as well, but it really is trying to map the entire journey, even beyond conversion to like referral and championing the product. And you use this content as a platform for thought leadership and product marketing and demand gen and account creation. I think this is what Bernard and I were talking about earlier when people were joining the room, really sort of the big change. When I was doing SEO 10 years ago, it was just about like driving traffic and hoping people like filter through the website and eventually become customers. And there's just so much content out there and so many brands competing for mindshare. Now it's really about doing like very effective product marketing and thought leadership and getting people into your funnel through this content, not just creating it and getting the traffic and having the website do the rest of the work. That's more for the product-led SEO crowd. Some examples of this, of companies that just do phenomenal content-led SEO, are Shopify, super elite team. I wouldn't want to go against them. They rank for just about everything related to e-commerce. And then there's Zendesk. If you're looking up anything around customer service or help desks or IT SM solutions, they're going to be in there. Atlassian, their content maps to pretty much the entire product management lifecycle, and whether that's like Agile and Scrum and how to manage like product development, or like even the more complex topics like product requirement documents and ITSM and service and like enterprise service desks. HubSpot ranks for everything related to marketing and sales and customer support and service. And every piece of content there was created very intentionally to target keywords. It wasn't something that was auto-generated and scaled like an e-commerce site. And then also Smartsheet, who we'll talk about later, I think they're doing like 400,000 to 600,000 visits a month off just like keywords for templates that get folks into their product. It's a not super well-known B2B player in SEO, but an absolute Goliath that kind of flies under the radar. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we got product-led SEO. And again, like a ton of respect for the people that do it. It's just a totally different form of SEO because it's a function of the product itself. It's technical and scalable by nature, and it typically involves a really high volume of pages. And the way it typically functions at its core is like the product data itself or your users create content for you. So some examples of this are like Indeed. Every time a job gets posted to the site, that job gets filtered through various category pages that rank in geolocations or for specific skill sets or various attributes of the job. G2 crowd, every time they get new reviews, that goes to various like review pages, alternative pages, versus pages. We're going to talk about how to compete with those in a little bit. SlideShare, same thing, but with like PowerPoint decks. And Liquid Space, which is like an hourly office rental company. You upload a new property to that site, that property is then featured on various category pages that then rank in search. So it's more of like a auto-generated scalable play versus a very intentional content marketing play. So here's why product-led growth, which we talked about earlier, is a really good fit for content-led SEO. I stole this graphic from Apptrinsic, but I think it just visualizes the whole thing so well. When it comes to driving traffic to the website, basically visits lead to signups and trials, because with product-led growth, there's very low friction to get into the product. And so like visits essentially do lead to easy onboarding to the product. And content is one of the primary drivers of traffic to the website. So as content drives traffic to the website, marketing team kind of pushes that traffic, converts that traffic. When it's qualified, once you get like a product qualified lead, the sales team can take over, kind of bring that home, and the customer success team can actually support that account for the long term. So you can kind of see how the traditional top-down model still has like this has the same players as like top-down SaaS sales. It's just a different way of getting customers into the product that's more on their terms than yours. And this is why this is such a good fit, because SEO is pretty much something that you opt into, something that you search for, and the product is something that you opt into and start using on your own. It's just they're very peanut butter and jelly correlated actions. So top-down models, though, they add friction, like, going into demos, sitting through like not even getting to the demo, having to be qualified by an SDR, filling out really long lead forms. Like, this is all friction. And friction for folks in search, it's a pretty poor user experience. And, I'm not like top-down sales models are absolutely not going away. If you're like an AI product that needs to cobble together a lot of data to build a model at first, or if you have like a really long implementation process, you need to be doing top-down sales. You can't support a freemium product, but you need to understand how that friction puts you at a disadvantage when going against companies executing a product-led growth motion. So if you can use search as a low friction entry point to the product, like if you are working at something that is freemium, you should be trying to put as many people into the product as possible in your SEO content. Like that is a really easy lock. Like if you can solve for people's jobs to be done with your product and they are searching for how to solve their job to be done, you should be trying to put people into the product every time, not like extra webinars or whatever, or PDFs. Like if the product is free and it's not a huge ask to get into it, you should be trying to send people there as much as you can. So an example of this, and because doesn't always require account creation, similar to Notion, examples and process guides and templates work really great for getting people into the product. This is an example that I worked on at DocSend. Sadly, this piece of content was killed off after the acquisition. But if you want to look it up in the Internet Archive, I'm sure it's still around. Basically, what we did is we went to Salesforce and we grabbed all the target accounts. So this was a bit of an ABM play too, just like lightly, not too intentional. But we appended file type PDF and the words case study and scraped like the top 20 results in Google. And that got us case studies from all of our target accounts, or case studies that mentioned our target accounts. We then went through them, categorized them, and built out libraries with like these sort of like little interactive cards where you flipped over, you could see the title of the case study. And then if you clicked in, you would actually get shot into DocSend. And this thing was doing like 10,000 visits a month, I believe, at one point. So, this actually got people to see like, hey, the DocSend viewer is much nicer than a naked PDF. You don't have to download it. You don't have to keep it on your desktop. And it works on mobile very well. Like it's just it's a different experience that people who build case studies and are looking for example of case studies were able to see and interact and experience with. And that's what we were trying to do with that piece. So, it's not just about like product pages and whatnot. Like if you can get people to see how your product is an example or something, or use it in a process guide, that's a great way to execute on SEO for a product-led growth company. But if you can't get folks into the product, you have to educate buyers on how to buy. Because if other people are offering non-friction experiences or frictionless experiences, and you have to offer friction as part of your sales process, you need to educate people about why you're worth their time and why they should go through that friction, that experience that is somewhat frictionless. I don't know the word for that. Sorry about that. Friction-filled experience is what I'm trying to say. But product-led growth has a natural advantage in search, but top-down SaaS can still compete. And the way that it can compete is through education. So I'm going to give some examples of one company that's executing a product-led growth motion and another company that is introducing a lot of friction that's not doing so well when it comes to SEO. So when you Google connect Instapage to Google Sheets, you can see Zapier right here, and it says connect your Instapage to Google Sheets integration it's truncated, but it's supposed to say in 2 minutes. And when you get to the page, you can see various ways that you can integrate the tools. You can sign up and it's making sign up very, very easy. If you're logged into Google, it actually like shows your image and allows you to get started in one click. And it says right there, in a matter of minutes and without a single line of code, Zapier allows you to automatically send info between Instapage and Google Sheets. So very easy experience, you know exactly what you're getting. Zapier is best in class when it comes to SEO for a product-led growth company. So now when we look at position 6, we can see Tray.io here. And when you land on the page, the H1 says something about Google Sheets and Instapage, and there's some in the subcopy. But when you go down to the bottom of the page, it's really just like marketing Tray. It's not about what you need to do. It doesn't really help you understand your jobs to be done and how the tool can help solve for it. There's really only 3 options when you get to the page. There's an on-demand demo, a free trial, and schedule a one-on-one demo. And if you actually try and do the free trial, you find out very quickly it's not a free trial, it's a trial request. You put in your work email, and then from there you need to say what services are you trying to integrate, how would you like these systems integrated, and how technical are you in a scale from 1 to 5? I don't know how to answer the last question because there's no context for what that means. Like, who are you comparing me to? And then how would you like these systems integrated? It's a tiny form field, and it's a complex question to be asking. So like they are adding a lot of friction, and it could be that they added these to cut down on bad leads. But a better way would be having a better way to rank would be having a page that works for everybody instead of just your ideal customer profile. So if you can't offer instant gratification, you have to be the education for deep you have to be the destination for deep education. And this is a page from Bright Pearl for inventory management software. And the whole thing is it's like avoid under or overselling. So they want you to find the right solution for you. They really map the entire market. And then you can see on the right-hand side, it's hard to capture the essence of like a web page for a slide deck, but you can see on the right-hand side, they actually go into specific competitors on this page, like TradeGecko and Stitch Labs and Veeqo. So if you're not the right fit for Bright Pearl, they let you see the rest of the market and really find the right solution for you. And this whole thing is tilted in Bright Pearl's favor, but it really does help people understand the market if they are the right fit for Bright Pearl to really resonate with them. So you shouldn't be just going for direct response content because you see other people doing it. You need to think about the business model you're supporting and the kind of experience that's going to happen post them being interested in your product, whether they can sign up or whether they have to go through a long sales cycle. So we've just level set. That was a ton, but now we're going to actually talk about like how to execute on this and how to map the purchase journey to content. So the very first thing you want to do is make sure you have your brand covered. This is an example from Zendesk right here. I primarily operate off of autosuggest. Ahrefs I think can be really, really helpful for B2C content and for like coarse grained B2B analysis. But when you start getting into like jobs to be done and integration partners and very specific niche topics that matter to your buyer, Ahrefs and SEMrush and SimilarWeb, they're not going to have that data. They typically get data from the least sophisticated internet users on the planet, folks that are having their data resold through shady Chrome extensions and through free VPNs. And I don't believe there's any iPhone data in there. That last I heard, there was no iPhone data in there. And a lot of folks that are working in B2B SaaS are using iPhone. So it's not the most accurate data source. So that's why I like using autosuggest. It's a real-time accurate feed of how people are searching. About a year ago, actually, or a year and a half ago, I was working in the business continuity space, and I noticed like right after the COVID announcements came out, one of the first things in autosuggest was business continuity COVID. And it kind of hit me like, oh, this is working in real time. Whereas like in SEMrush or Ahrefs, you'll see like, best payroll software 2018. And like people are not looking at 2018 payroll software because it was like an especially great vintage of payroll software. It's because that data inside of those tools is old and stale. So I primarily operate off of Google Autosuggest. And you can see right here, we got pages for like Zendesk pricing, Zendesk support, and like maybe someone for Zendesk support, like, yes, you should have a page that can route current customers to the right support team. But you should also have a page that sells your support and lets them know about like SLAs and how customers can contact you, whether there's a phone, whether it's chat, so they can understand what they're getting into. Or like Zendesk features, you should have a page that covers all of your features. And so you're not just giving that up to a review site. And I think, especially with upmarket companies, like Zendesk has transparent pricing. Something that actually happened to us last week, working with one company that doesn't have transparent pricing. And what we found is some review site from 3 or 4 years ago that gave them a write-up was ranking the featured snippet with a static price that was way less than what they sell for today. So if you don't go after these terms, other companies will, and you're just gonna be seeding traffic to folks that give out the answers. So even if it's not something you want to talk about, you don't need to answer the question directly. You can rank for your branded terms very, very easily. These are all layups. This is beyond bottom of the funnel. This is when people are basically bringing the home deal. This is the very last stage before sign up for a lot of these terms. So important to have them covered. But once you've got your branded keywords figured out, I like to move into versus pages, which I'd say is like bottom of the funnel. And so when you type in your brand name and versus and you get all that auto suggest, those are the most popular competitors people are comparing you to, whether you want them to or not. So I like to build pages out for all of these, but you can't just create a page that's like, hey, don't use them, use us, we're great. People are looking for an actual comparison. So what you need to do is perform a fresh competitive analysis, put together that list of competitors from autosuggest, talk to the sales team, look in the CRM, see who's popping up in deals, and then go and look up features and benefits, integration partners, pricing, what customers are saying on review sites. And the thing here is you got to evaluate the market through the lens of your own product. You don't want to do this analysis and have like ServiceNow or Jira always coming out on top because they have more features and more integrations. You need to be creating this analysis for your customer and your product today. So the way I like to frame this is to be biased but honest, because you want to tilt things in your favor, but you don't want to be so biased that people don't trust the information that they're reading. So the way to execute on these pages, this is a great example from Paddle, really, really savvy company. They get compared to Stripe a lot because they both do payment processing and Stripe's kind of the incumbent. So we're going to talk about how they execute. But you're doing one-to-one comparisons, not just a one-sided promotion. And then you want to dive into features and benefits, but you want to allow people to quickly grok the understanding of how their difference is and then dive in from there if they need to. You want to include testimonials and reviews and awards. You can see that Paddle has that right there with their G2 crowd rewards. And you want to utilize strong product CTAs or demo CTAs because this is the very bottom of the funnel. People are basically deciding between you and someone else. And then again, you got to be biased but honest. But I really like what Paddle does here because they have like a really streamlined view for some core differentiators around implementation, performance, growth, and compliance. And if you just want to understand like how is implementation different, single unified integration, depending on multiple integrations, et cetera, that's fine. But if you want to dive in, all of these have divs that expand and they can actually send you to a detail page that further sells like Paddle on performance. This is great because this is questions that their sales reps are going to be getting all the time. So, even before people get into a meeting, they are going to want to know how Stripe is different from Paddle. So this codifies it, gets people on the same message, and informs leads before they get on the call about the differences. They don't ask the same questions as sales reps every single time. And something I get asked a lot when we're working up market is like, versus pages for the enterprise, isn't that punching down? Isn't that something that underdogs do? And I'd say absolutely not. If your buyers are looking for it, you should be a part of that conversation rather than pretending like it's not happening. So this is a great example from Jira going after ServiceNow, and they hit them right from the start on price. And they say starting at only $20 an agent per month. And that is ServiceNow is just not going to do that. They don't have transparent pricing. It's a very long sales cycle. They also have a try it for free button right there. So you can get in and see the product because Atlassian does execute product-led growth extremely well. So even with enterprise leads, they're allowing people to get in friction free, just having to give over their information, no credit card required. But the thing I really love here is they break it down so you can compare Jira Service Management to ServiceNow. And again, they're being, they're clearly biased, but they're being honest. They take data from G2 Crowd's Service Desk Implementation Report and basically say, hey, we take 1.2 months to go live compared to ServiceNow, which takes 4.5. So if you want to go live in a third of the time, we're going to be the right solution for you. They also talk about transparent pricing again. And they basically say, like, if you're going to get into a renewal cycle with ServiceNow, you don't know what you're going to be paying per seat, 3 years down the road. With us, it's always going to be predictable. It's going to be easier to forecast expenses for your business. So a few key takeaways here. First is you got to appeal to the lizard brain with these pages. You want skimmable content that people can dive into. So allow folks that don't need a deep dive to quickly grok the page and understand why you're different and better, but also allow people that need deep product information to get that information and build that business case for themselves. There's different types of buyers out there. There's people that are going to just want a quick understanding, and there's folks that are going to want to read every last word and look at your documentation. Make sure you make pages work for both. And then the other thing here is chat is your friend, but you got to keep it contextual. You got to optimize chat so it's relevant to the topic of the page. Otherwise, it just feels really self-serving if you're seeing a generic message on a very specific, deeper page. I love this one from WP Engine. They use their bot, Walter P. And he says, want to know why WP Engine is better than Kinsta? We're available now to answer any questions. And this lives on their WP Engine versus Kinsta page. And so it's basically saying like, hey, if you want to have this conversation, we're here and we're ready for you. And we know exactly how to address your questions. Just a little side note though, like if you're working in a space where some friction is involved, like if you have to have friction for WP Engine, you have to sign up for the product, then you have to migrate your WordPress site. There is a lot of friction involved in that process of onboarding via WP Engine customer. They have plugins to help you and whatnot, but it's still not a friction-free experience like it is with product-led growth. So they actually have a chat alert in their top nav that lights up for sales questions when people are ready to chat. And they, I think like if you are a business that has some friction, you should be executing something similar because chat is a way to reduce friction when you need to go through a sales cycle or when you can't just let people into the product. So if you're working in a company that has a friction-filled sales experience that you can't get rid of, committing to chat is a good move. When I was at WP Engine, chats were a daily part of my KPI because it was a daily growth KPI. And even if you can't get away with actual versus pages, you should get away with what you can. This is a great example from Workday. And you can see at the bottom, Workday does a lot to make this like an on-demand demo experience and really let you kind of like big on the consumerization of the enterprise. Like Workday lets you go into demos that are on demand. They've got chat right there. They execute really well. This page is a vendor versus partner, and vendor is in the same font as Oracle. This is clearly meant to be taking a shot at Oracle, but I'm guessing whoever was creating these pages at Workday could not get that out. So even if you're not going to be able to rank for it in search, and this actually does rank for some Workday versus queries. I'm not sure if it ranks for Workday versus Oracle. It doesn't mention Oracle on the page, but buyers are still going to use this because this helps them build a business case. We work with the company Heap, and we actually have a lot of customers that use their product. And something we can see with Heap product, it can tie Salesforce records to individual users. And folks, even after they go on a demo or submit a demo request, they go to these pages to build an internal business case. So these don't just get used for like lead generation or demo generation or getting folks into the product. They are used for folks that need to build business cases to get buy-in for budget for like a bigger implementation or for getting the product in the door in the first place. So once you have all your versus pages, then the move is to create a hub. This is an example from Podia, one of our customers. And the hub that they have actually ranks for Podia alternatives, which is good to get because folks that are considering alternatives doesn't mean they're necessarily leaving your product. They just want to understand how other folks in the market measure up, and it's still good traffic to get. It can still convert. But this page is really like one of the best places to learn about the market and from a feature perspective. And those features are mapped to Podia's product. But like this is much richer information than G2 Crowd. Just G2 Crowd mainly just traffics and reviews, and it's very formulaic for the page that they're on. Or it's basically like a formulaic survey. It's not that customized to the product. Whereas like this is very specific to the product and the category. But below those tables, there are links to all the versus pages, and then there's a link to the hub page in the footer. And that's how these pages essentially they get some link equity. They also get links on their own because they're really good examples of versus pages. But I really like having sort of that hub and spoke model for the versus pages rather than trying to have them hidden. And if people want to understand how your product is different from a competitor, you shouldn't make it hard to find. You want people learning from you rather than from other sites. So from there, we're going to go one step up the funnel to alternatives pages. And so take that list of competitors from versus autosuggest and the CRM and from the sales team, and you want to look up competitor alternatives, and competitor competitors, and you want to see what's ranking and mimic what's working. We look at Expensify alternatives here. We can see G2 Crowd, Capterra, Fool.com, Trust Radius, Finances Online, GetApp, all buyer's guides, all things that help people map the market and list out specific competitors. So the alternative page format, you can go long form, you can go short form, you can kind of try and combine versus pages with alternatives, although I don't recommend it. I think for up and coming brands, you need to play to the SERP, and what you see ranking in the top 5, that's kind of the content format you need to mimic. If it's mixed intent and you see like thinner pages ranking, it could be like with products that aren't that complicated to buy, short form pages can rank. But if you're seeing something like this, where it's all long form buyer's guides, you clearly like long form is the move. The first DR page that we can see here, like short, thinner versus pages from File HQ at the bottom at number 8. So like, if you want to be playing with G2 Crowd, Capterra, and Fool, a long form buyer's guide that specifically lists out competitors is the move here. And then we take it to the singular Expensify alternative. We see File HQ at number 3, but like G2 Crowd and Fool that map the market, they're still above, and they're still going to be getting like much more click through. Folks are still going to go to File HQ, and if you want to kind of do that calculation of we get less traffic, but we have a higher conversion rate, you can kind of do that calculus and figure out which path you want to go down. But if you're trying to lock in top rankings, which get so much more traffic than position 3 and 4, mapping the market is typically the move. Like people don't really want to link to short form versus pages that are highly promotional, but they do want to link to buyer's guides that help people understand the right tool for them. So up and comer, I think you pretty much need to go with a long form versus page. As an example from Help Crunch, where they look for Zendesk alternatives and they map the whole market. And then we have Freshworks right here. And this is actually not a great example because if you look, it says like looking for a Zendesk alternative, and then it just sells Freshdesk. And that doesn't actually help people compare. I'm sure it gets some leads from them, but it's not going to rank as well as something that's helpful and long form and lets people solve for their jobs to be done instead of just like promoting an existing product. So unless you're established, enterprise, or frictionless, comprehensiveness typically wins. Most buyers researching software, they're not looking to just sign up. They're looking to get informed or instantly execute like they can on like a Zapier page. And if your brand is, but like something to keep in mind is if your brand is strong enough to convert prospects on name alone, like a HubSpot or a Salesforce, even if you are top down, you should test out DR SEO pages. They could work and you could rank. But typically over time, I do think long form buyer's guides tend to rank better. And if you're relatively new on the scene, if you have less links than the competition, or if everyone who's searching for alternative isn't going to be a fit, long form is absolutely the move. A good example of like when people aren't a fit, Gorgeous is a Zendesk alternative for Shopify users. So you need to be on Shopify in order to use Gorgeous. But everyone that's searching for Zendesk alternative, they're not all going to be on Shopify. So Gorgeous, if they want to rank for Shopify alternative, they need to create a guide that works for everybody, including e-commerce users, but also folks that have never even heard of Shopify. And then for long form alternative pages, this is pretty much the protocol I recommend. This is an example from Heap, one of our customers. You want to basically introduce the incumbent, and then right after the introduction, call out their issues. So you can see, it's hard to see, but it's basically like the shortcomings of Google Analytics, focus on acquisition rather than activation and retention, extremely limited segmentation, can't track conversion data out of the box, requires customization with Google Tag Manager to track events. And then the big issue, incomplete data. So basically taking shots at the competitor, letting people know why it's not always the right fit for them. And then introducing yourself first. And Heap talks about all of their issues and sort of how they, or excuse me, all of their benefits and how they fill some of the issues that Google Analytics has with their product and take care of some of the gaps that it doesn't solve for. And now sort of like middle of the funnel for like category and software terms, something to think about is most people searching for like your category, like BI portal software or product analytics software, they aren't ready to buy. They're trying to build a consideration set and map the market. Search engine users are primarily looking for information unless it's a low consideration purchase. Example of a good low consideration purchase, we use FreshBooks. I think I Googled like small business invoicing software and signed up in 5 minutes and really haven't thought about it much since. And they do have some DR SEO pages that rank for that because it's very, very easy to get started. But if this was a more complex need, if this was a more upmarket company, we would have wanted to look at our options more. So this is your chance that with these pages to get potential buyers to self-educate to the point where they think the unique features of your product and the capabilities of it are table stakes for the category. Heap does a fantastic job with positioning auto capture, their ability to like capture all data and not require event tracking to be set up beforehand. They do a really good job of positioning that as table stakes for product analytics. And then Google wants to rank comprehensive, helpful, informative content, not some DR landing page that forces users into a funnel. So unless you're giving out a free version of your product and it's very low friction experience, you are typically going to want to be creating comprehensive content that helps people understand the market. And if you don't want to mention competitors in one of these pages, like a sort of a buyer's guide, you can provide an evaluation rubric, like how do I choose the best BI software instead of what is the best BI software guide for you. And then you should really use these pages to take visitors from what does the category do and why does that matter? And then how will it help me? And then should I evaluate potential solutions all the way to how do I get started with your product? And then just to jump to the very, very top of the funnel, the what is category pages protocol. What I like to do is like make a page that basically answers that lizard brain query of just like, what is it? I like to give it out in like a separate div. I find that helps get the rich snippet a little bit better. So you can see what is product analytics with the question and answer right there to how will it help me all the way to why you and why should I be using your product. So it really is about like taking someone from like, what is this? All the way to how do I get started? So it's not just super top of funnel unengaged. You can drive users from pages like this. And some feedback that I get from executives sometimes is like, what is what is help desk software? What is IT automation? That's so basic. Like our buyers aren't going to be searching for that, right? And I think you're wrong. This is your chance to frame how you want people to think about your category. It's a way to articulate your point of view on the category, what's wrong with it, trends in the space, and why you're building what you're building. And for more technical products, I like to think of these pages as sales enablement. Someone who maybe isn't the best communicator isn't going to try and build a business case on their own. By being able to send a page about like, what is the category and why do we need to invest in it to like a stakeholder that needs to sign off, that can be a really valuable sales tool or sales enablement tool for an internal champion. So again, you want to take users from what is this to how will it help me to how do I get started? And I think like some companies view this content as just like a box to be checked, like what is A/B testing or what are feature flags, but it's not. This is you being able to plant your flag and articulate your category and define your category for the industry and for people searching for it. So this is a really powerful opportunity in search. It's not one just to be kind of checked off by an intern. And then for the more top and middle funnel opportunities, I recommend mining autosuggest. So you can see right here with account-based marketing, you can basically pull out things like account-based marketing tactics, software, examples. And then if you tease out autosuggest with various alphanumeric characters, you can see more long tail that's popular in search. Google Search Console is also a really good tool for this. You'll see things that you're on the board for, but not ranking for yet. And then we can, see this with e-commerce fulfillment. Not everything is going to be relevant. If you're not operating in Australia, not going to be worth creating content around Australia for, but it is helpful for people to understand like various e-commerce fulfillment services or various fulfillment models, or what is a fulfillment center, or what is the process like for fulfillment. Like that is all things that are going to eventually map to people needing a new fulfillment provider. So this is a great way to map the middle and top of funnel. And then for anything where you can't lead to a demo or give out a tool or a template, I recommend anything where you can't lead to people getting to the product or giving out a demo. You should give out a tool or a template or a free PDF. Shopify does a really, really good job with this. You can see their custom terms of service for your website generator. They have other things like e-commerce cost calculators and like company name generators that do tons and tons of traffic. but it's going beyond just like answering questions that people have in search. And it's actually solving for their jobs to be done. Gainsight has a CS metrics calculator. And if you are running CS at a company, you need to put together like a presentation for like a board deck or for, the executive team. This has all the calculations you need to do on things like net renewal rate and gross renewal rate and logo retention, net promoter score. So you can kind of have that deck be built for you using this tool and then eventually get onto Gainsight. And example from WP Engine, when I was there, this tool was very valuable in helping me hit my monthly number. But this ranks for WordPress speed test, and you basically put in your website and then you run your email, and you get a 10-day course. You get a score on how fast your WordPress site is, and you get enrolled into a 10-day course. But the lead also gets sent to sales, and I believe on the back end they look up SEM rush traffic and like employee count, and that helps value the lead a little bit. But I mean, this thing basically it helped people figure out how fast their WordPress site was, but it also drove qualified leads that needed a solution like WP Engine. So really, really valuable. Couldn't get them into the product, but could help them evaluate where they stood today. And here's an example from ServiceTitan with an HVAC load calculator. This is something that ServiceTitan customers are going to need to use. I think you get like one free calculation, then after that it gates it. So don't be afraid to ask for the information if you're providing real value with tools like these. And I think like as I mentioned earlier, like answering questions in search, like what is and why does it matter and why is it important, what are its benefits, those are great. But getting into the workflows of tomorrow's customers today is another, because as customers come to trust your site for giving them information, helping them solve for their jobs to be done, when it comes to buy that software, they're going to have a lot of trust and affinity in your brand. So getting them to come to your site today when they're not ready to be a customer and using those free tools, super, super valuable. And that is it. I'd be happy to open up to questions. Thanks for sitting through this, everybody.
Wow, that was awesome. That was filled with so many good nuggets of insights. I guess there's like a little bit of feedback from the audience where the slides, maybe due to like your Zoom setup, came out a little bit blurry. Like,
oh no.
Yeah. Anyways, just for future reference for the stuff, but that was really, really good stuff. I have like a question in terms of this idea that's been floating around of like topical, like subject matter authority, right? There's the top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of funnel, like you mentioned. Is it safe to say that you need to cover the entire range of all of those different topics to like have the, like tide lift all the ships for your subject matter authority for that particular topic? Or do you recommend from like a prioritization standpoint that you just go, all right, let's go transactional bottom of the funnel, then middle of the funnel, then like what is? I was like, how would you prioritize tackling all of the different like stages of the buyer's journey? And do you subscribe to this idea of like subject matter authority and topical like stuff?
Yeah. Let me answer the second part first. I think with topical authority, like we as SEO folks really like the idea of like rules or completing or getting scores of 100 or covering every single thing. And it's not like if I have 20 pieces of content about topic A and you've got 25, you're going to start outranking me. There's a lot of different factors in there. So I really try and prioritize to like the business use case. Like for integration pages, if you need to create SEO pages to market integrations, like go for the ones that create higher LTV. Like go for ones for more valuable customers. If you don't think, it also comes down to like, if you need to build your brand, going for some of that top of funnel traffic for broader terms that you can expose people to your brand and how you think about various topics that maybe aren't directly related to purchasing your product today. If that's more valuable for your company, if you don't have much of a brand, then yeah, like start with some of the top of funnel stuff. I personally like starting with versus pages because even though they are lower traffic, they typically generate pipeline. Folks that are searching for company A versus company B are much more qualified and ready to buy than people that are like, show me all the tools about software category Y. So when they have a one-to-one decision to make, you're most likely going to get some pipeline out of those pages. Whereas, category software, especially if you're in a broad category like BI tools, like that's going to be real tough. So I like getting some pipeline in the door. And that's why I like starting with versus pages. Alternative pages can also be really, really powerful if you're a good alternative. It just matters. Like, for a company like Gorgeous, which only works for Zendesk, like Zendesk Alternatives is not going to be the most valuable page for them because only a fraction of the people that are coming to that page are going to be on Shopify. So it really depends on what I'm trying to say is it's very contextual to the business. I think there's so many opportunities for content to create when you mine autosuggest that you really need to think about, like, what do our customers care about? Like in the monitoring space right now, monitoring Prometheus with Kubernetes is a very hot topic. That's going to be much more interesting than like monitoring MySQL servers. So you need to think about the technologies and use cases that matter to your customers of today and tomorrow, and not just like what does SEMrush or Ahrefs say is going to drive 1,000 visits. Like, it's so I really would try and prioritize around the business rather than like a keyword score or a difficulty. And even if it's competitive, like I don't care. Like, you should still have the content on the site, even if you can't rank for it today, and get people to drive to it to external links if it's something that or internal links if it's something that you really want to rank for. So I try to not let SEO be the editorial prioritization mechanism. Sometimes it is. Sometimes, like, if you need to get pipeline in the door, yeah, let's prioritize those bottom of the funnel pages. And it's also like, we don't need to cover every single aspect of 360 employee reviews or of feature flags. Like, great example is we work with Launch Darkly, and like feature flagging for Android isn't even, it's mainly people looking that are Android users. So it's like, it's not something that I'm prioritizing covering because I know that audience isn't going to be that valuable because it's mainly folks that are using Android phones. I'm not worried about topical comprehensiveness there. The whole site talks about the topic of feature flags. So it's more about what gaps do you need to fill in what time frame than do we have everything, that every variation of this. And it's like, just we're getting a little off topic. I think we also are like almost too reliant on the topic cluster model of thinking like, oh, if I have an incomplete cluster, it's not going to matter. It's like, oh, if the URLs and the subdirectories are different, it's not a true cluster. Like, again, I think like SEO is mainly about moving like directionally accurate in a directionally accurate pattern and not like hitting everything to the 100 score. So if you can execute and write good content and have it directionally be accurate, you're going to do pretty well, rather than someone who's trying to make sure every I is dotted, every T is crossed. Like, the thing that creates growth in SEO is pushing out new pages and getting new links, unless you have like toxic links or a bunch of crap pages on the site already that are causing issues with indexation. If you're a newer company, it is about pushing out new pages into search that can rank and get new traffic. That is how you increase like the overall surface area of the site. So it's mainly about not just what's going to generate new traffic, but what's going to generate buyers who can actually use our product and get real value out of it and stick with us for the long term.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me. And now, as a follow-up, we have a question from Mark, who asks, for versus pages, where do you house these pages? I don't necessarily want someone who enters on a different landing page to find a list of all my competitors. However, I obviously need Google to be able to find those pages. So what pages do you link to the versus pages from?
Yeah, well, but like, if people want to see your competitors, you should be the one giving them that information. Like, you shouldn't be, if a real business risk for you is people finding out that competitors exist, you have much bigger problems than SEO. So it does, like, you should always be willing to have that conversation, even with like committed customers that are out. If you find out they're shopping, like, you're not just gonna be like, oh, well, we hope you don't research it. We're not going to support your journey. So you should have those pages be findable, and you shouldn't be like embarrassed about them or self-conscious about them. You should be able to articulate where you stand in the market and where you match up to competitors. That being said, I think it's fine to have like an alternatives hub that lives in your footer. If you don't, and like some companies I work with, they have gaps in their product that it's tough to compare to certain competitors, and they don't want to have those conversations all the time. I get that. I think that's mainly like a messaging and positioning issue most of the time, and that's a bigger problem than SEO. But for some reason, I feel like there's this vibe that like versus pages are kind of like taboo and should be hidden. But anything that's hidden on your site, it's not going to rank well in search. And like, these pages are so much more valuable, in my opinion, at least, than like your high traffic software pages. Like, these are folks that are like, I have budget, I'm deciding between two, which one do I go to? I would much rather drive people to that page than to like top 10 tips about customer service. So I'm not trying to be flippant to whoever asked that question. I just don't think it's the best way to look at it. The like, how do I get links to these pages? I'm not trying to have people see them. I think you should get very comfortable with the idea of people seeing these pages.
Absolutely. I guess from when you link to it, commonly I see it placed in like footers, right? It'd be like, oh, blah alternatives, or like, compare our software to others, like that kind of thing. Is that kind of the going best practice? Is there any inkling of this idea? This is now like obviously treading into SEO territory, where like links, internal links placed higher up, more above the fold, are more valuable or pass more link equity than internal links that are placed in the footer. Like any thoughts as a follow-up on like just what's on my mind about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you do, I mean, Google still crawls those links in the footer, and I don't like playing SEO Nostradamus because I don't know. But I'll say, like, we don't only link to those pages in the footer with customers we work with. We keep, like, if you go to Heap's product analytics guide, they send you to the mixed panel alternatives page. And it's like they're not, like, Heap is a great example of a company really tackling SEO in a steady and solid fashion. Like, they're not afraid to send people to mixed panel alternatives or to, amplitude alternative pages. They're fine having that discussion because their product is uniquely differentiated. So inside of their buyer's guides, it's like, hey, if you want to see how we stack up to this, check out our versus page. So I think there are ways when you're working down funnel and you're not just like, yeah, it's really hard. If you're doing like customer service tips, it's hard to link to your like Zendesk versus ServiceNow page. But if you're talking about anything around like buying the product or integrating the product or using the product, I think it is easier to link to those buyer's guides and then to have those buyer's guides link out to versus and alternative pages.
Totally. Now I'm gonna get out of sequence of these Q&As because there's more about the implementation on versus and alternative stuff. So cool. Enrique asks, is there a best practice for how frequently you update these versus pages?
When you get a cease and desist from a competitor. I mean, you should do it as your product updates, and like, hopefully your product updates relatively frequently, but yeah, you do need to keep them up to date, because if customers have some familiarity with the market and they find that the pages are not true, that bashes your credibility right there. So you do like, I mean, quarterly is great. You probably will, like, I've gotten C&Ds before. So if you're afraid of letters from lawyers, which like they're not going to do, hopefully they don't do anything, but like that can happen. So something that you should step into before you get into the versus page understanding is if you misrepresent a product, you will get a letter from a lawyer. So keeping them up to date with both your product and the market is good. I'd say like quarterly is fine. If you need to make it into an internal process, monthly, I think would be a bit too much.
Now that's interesting. So we have like a question from Tom, which kind of touches on this. And then I have like a question myself. It's, do you ever recommend to a client that, like a competitor has a versus page or an alternative page to, cease and desist the competitor's page? And then subsequently, Tom asks, what kinds of issues do you see getting stakeholder buy-in for SEO content with your clients? How do you navigate, there's so many questions about this because it is kind of touchy, right? You can get cease and desist, or you could get into some potential hot water when discussing competitors. So how do you navigate all of that?
So I wouldn't recommend doing a C&D to a competitor. Like, I'm not a very litigious person. If they were misrepresenting the product and they had bad pricing on the site, then yeah, I would consider that. But I'm hesitant to get legal involved for various reasons. It's just it's not the move, and it's not how I like working. And then for getting buy-in for these pages, like, sometimes I have to sell them to someone who's more senior, but when you explain to people like, this is the very bottom of the funnel, and if you don't have this conversation, G2 crowd happily will, and they'll sell that intent data to anyone who will buy it. That's a pretty compelling thing to tell an executive. Like, hey, like, I don't think you understand this, but they can either come to our website or they can go to all these other websites like TechTarget and Capterra, and basically get intent data sold on them that's going to give them their email and then have them be reached out by all of our competitors. So we should get a page up there to start harvesting this traffic, or it's just going to literally go to our competitors. And that tends to get some people talking. And then I think like these conquesting pages, these versus pages, once you sell people the idea of like, listen, what is our category? Like, what is law firm management software? that's going to have a hard time generating pipeline. It will generate some, but people who are looking for like Clio versus whatever, that is someone who's in market. So even if we don't want to have people having these, even if we don't want people to have these conversations or to use this phrasing, we need to meet them on their own terms and use the language of the consumer or the buyer rather than using our branded jargon and only talking about the topics that we want to talk to. I think that's kind of core of SEO. It's like if you just wrote about whatever you wanted to, you probably wouldn't get much traffic. But by doing some research and figuring out how the market speaks about your product, you can get a whole lot of traffic and convince people to get into your funnel. So this is just like one more keyword to go after that is extremely high value and oftentimes like not that expensive on a CPC side, depending on the market that you're in. So for paid search, but like these are like people with their hands on their wallet. Like I can't understand why you wouldn't want to get in front of them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I have an interesting follow-up to that. It's like, say, we're going with the help desk software space as an example, and I'm a competitor to Freshdesk. I'm also a competitor to Zendesk and Help Scout, right? If I wrote a Help Scout alternatives page, wouldn't that content almost be identical to a Zendesk alternatives page and a Freshdesk alternatives page? It's pretty much the same comparisons, except you swap out the thing. Is there, like, have you noticed that matters or doesn't matter if the content's like duplicative across a lot of these? And similarly, I could imagine the versus stuff could also have some overlap as well.
Well, with the long form alternatives, because you're mapping it from the market of the lens that you're looking at it through is the lens of the incumbent. Ideally, all of the content will be slightly different because you're comparing all of it to the main alternative. Mm-hmm. So you're not going to, it's like, an alternative to Google Analytics is going to be very different to an alternative to Pendo. Like they're very different use cases. So you'd be talking about different things in each blurb. And then for the versus pages, like it's part of your brand. So typically it's like your brand name, like Heap versus Google Analytics. So you're not going to have as hard of a time ranking for that. It's almost similar to like those branded pages, like Zendesk pricing that I mentioned earlier. So I think you're going to have a pretty easy time ranking for those terms. Ideally the content in like the versus comparison table will be different. And if you're worried about differentiation, or if there's like some topically comprehensive stuff going on, getting quotes from people who switched off of that competitor onto your product and get them to tell their story is a way to get text on the page that's topically relevant. I think switching reviews are tough. And like I had a ex-customer launch one on me at one point when I was in my in-house career, and I called them up and I was like, I'm like, hey, I know you're gone, but this was not a cool move. And they had that pulled down. So it's like those are, I think the case study about like why we ditched this company is much more sensitive than like the versus page. But filling up with customer testimonials or like switcher testimonials, I think is a great move. And then with your versus pages, you should have some language that's specific to that product. Like if it's all just like templated, super easy to push out, you're probably missing some nuance that the buyer cares about. So I'd be very careful to think about that. Like it's not, we're not comparing like blue jeans here. Like product analytics are deeply nuanced products with a lot of differentiation. So your versus page should reflect that in there. Just because it can be a template doesn't mean you should take a templatized approach to busting out that content. You can still put a lot of effective product marketing inside of that page.
Awesome. All right. One last question, and then we're right up at time. Mark asks, any specific schema that is relevant for these versus and alternatives pages? And then I'll tack on a follow-up to that is, any specific schema that's relevant to B2B SEO at all in your experience?
Yeah, the versus pages can be, if it's a complex product, FAQ schema can be great. Get those like 3 questions under there, push other folks below you in the real estate. And like with some, I don't want to go into the company that it's for, but it says like, why do product teams choose X solution over Y? So like very aggressive questions in the FAQ schema. And then for B2B SEO, like, I'm waiting for Jono to pop up on Twitter after this, but like, I don't think it's that important. I haven't seen too many big wins from schema. Like, yeah, knowledge graph stuff, but like knowledge graph, in my opinion, doesn't like drive revenue. So I'm not too worried about it. Like star reviews, sure, but like, I'm not going to go, like, I don't think people are going to be wowed on like 6-figure budgets that are spending 6 figures on like, oh, this had 4 stars, that other one had 5. I think most of it's noise. It really is like because like schema is about getting the click. And in my opinion, B2B search is more about converting the person post-click than just getting the traffic. If you just get traffic and nothing else happens, it's vanity traffic that's worthless. So I'm less focused on schema, very focused on engaging title tags. And if we can, getting solid metadata in there, and if Google doesn't overwrite it, and letting people understand the value of the post before they click on the page. But like having like a pricing thing under, like, I don't even want people to think about price. They should be thinking about value. So, and most of the schema stuff, I think it's like designed for consumer. So it's like, what reviews do you have? How many stars do you have? And it's not as important for trying to buy complex software products. That being said, like, for sites running on WordPress, like, yeah, we do have schema on those blog posts and everything, but it's not moving the needle for us. What's moving the needle is more pages that map to the buyer journey and help people understand their jobs to be done and how the product solves for it.
Yeah. That was a great response. The FAQ thing certainly, I think, has a lot of weight because, yeah, you get more real estate. But I hadn't seen that much B2B specific schema in my observation, which is why I asked that as well. Well, cool.
I think if you want to see a site that's doing it well, QuickSprout has become like this massive affiliate site now, and they do a lot of interesting stuff. The more I compete with them, I'm like, ooh, this is smart. I think, but again, I'd focus more on rich snippets than schema. That's the better advice that I have on that one. But Bernard, thank you so much for having me on, man. This was a blast. I'm glad I got to present to everybody. I'm sorry that the slides were not perfectly formatted. I'll send out a link to the slide deck after this.
Awesome. No, dude, it was an honor having you. And I'll follow up with you shortly afterwards with just recap stuff.
Awesome. Cool. All right. Thank you so much.
Right. Yeah. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there.